Hello, BookTube. It's Tuesday, and that means Tag Tuesday in our little corner of BookTube, where we drop everything and do tags, and I love them. I watch all kinds of tags on Tag Tuesday, and I have one today that is performance TV. It's the W tag. We are approaching the end game of the alphabet tags being created by Jim at Jim's Books and Reading and stuff. And we're all the way up to the letter W, which has a ton of great prompts. I want to give you a little warning ahead of time. You'll have to excuse any sound of shoveling or barreling or baling that's going on in the background. I mentioned the other day that my neighbor is apparently building a spaceship in order to take him away from this benighted planet. I can't really object to that, even though it means metal on metal banging at odd hours of the night. And it seems like now he is installing his fuel. So I'm thinking that he won't be here long. So on the negative side, I won't have the pleasure of chatting with him. And on the positive side, there'll be a condo that opens up. But I'll try to talk over the shoveling sound. The only shoveling of you know what that should happen on this channel should be done by me. So we'll start with the prompts. W is for werewolf. Have you read any books about werewolves? I realize that Jim is pitching these questions to everyone, not just me, but I have read many, many books about werewolves. Just read one earlier this year about werewolves in the ancient Roman world. Uh, I've read a great many books about werewolves. I have a large number of them that I consult on a regular basis. I think they're fascinating. We could do with another big, it's been 60 years, 70 years since the last big comprehensive look, sort of a historical slash sociological slash pop culture inquiry into the werewolf. I would love to see another one of those. I'd love to see a few of them. I'd be curious to know also why these monster ideas come and go in cycles. The last werewolf, Wolfman movie with Benicio del Toro was so bad that fans stayed away from it in droves. Well, the last really popular werewolf character in pop culture that I know of is the character of Jacob from the Twilight novels, who has a mighty strange and diseased subplot, even for a book full of diseased subplots. So maybe I'm missing something. I'd be curious to know. But yes, I have read many, many books on werewolves. This year I read that book. Recently I read that book on werewolves in the ancient world. And I also reread Robert McCammon's book, The Wolf's Hour, which is about a werewolf who is not a victim. It's a World War II historical adventure, spy, espionage novel in which the main character, the main adventure haver, is a fully grown male werewolf who is in complete control over his ability to change from man to wolf. I hadn't read it in years when I found another copy and reread it, and it is just as good. It holds up just fine. W is for witch. What is the last book you read about a witch? Here I could stretch the point just a little and say Dune, because the all-female sort of paranormally powered society, the Bene Gesserit, that plays a major role in the book, are widely regarded by everyone else as witches. They're just routinely called Bene Gesserit witches. So Lady Jessica would certainly count. So that I think is going to do it. W is for wizard. We're doing a triptych of fantasy-oriented W prompts here. Who is your favorite literary wizard? And I know that some of you will immediately think it's going to be Radagast the Brown from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, since he's a wizard who appears to be animal related. He appears to like the company of animals, non-human animals, more than humans themselves. That would be special pleading. Of course, my favorite literary wizard is Gandalf. Of course it is. Then a W is for women writers. What percentage of the books you read are written by women? I don't have any idea. I read books. I don't take census accounts. I'm not doing any of this by demographics. And I would argue, not to be snotty or prescriptive here, that you shouldn't either. And that the reason you're doing that is either buried self-loathing on your part or fear of being canceled by teenagers on Twitter. I would say read where your reading takes you instead of looking at your reading and saying, I don't have a Western Samoan writer on my shelves, and I haven't said that I like their book, even if I don't like their book, and that makes me a bad person. I don't keep track. I don't keep count, so I have no idea what the percentage is. W is for war. What is your favorite book about World War I? And here I thought about a whole bunch of books. G.J. Meyer wrote a book called The World Undone, which is really, really good. I have a whole shelf of books on various battles, various figures in the war, that sort of thing, various years. Very popular to write about World War One in terms of year. I think the favorite would still have to go to The Guns of August by Barbara Tuckman. I have read that book so many times and fell in love with it right when it came out. Unless we are willing to stretch World War One books to include Seven Pillars of Wisdom by Lawrence of Arabia. It's possible to do that. I think technically it is. If we, it's not specifically about the whole of the war, all of the different battles and whatnot, but it is born of World War One. It wouldn't exist without World War One. If we can stretch the definition to include Seven Pillars of Wisdom, then of course that wins by a wide margin over anything else. It's one of the greatest works of literary nonfiction, I would argue, ever written. Certainly one of the greatest works of literary nonfiction in the 20th century. But if we exclude that by being picky, then I would say The Guns of August. W is for Washington, White House, and worst. So you see trouble coming on the horizon here. Would you consider James Buchanan to be the worst U.S. president? No. No, not by a long shot. No. Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, planned, orchestrated, and incited a violent insurrection to attack the Capitol, execute his vice president, and overturn an election to install himself as a dictator for life, an unelected figure for life. He actively planned, actively plotted, and actively, openly on camera to the world incited that event to happen. No U.S. president, not James Buchanan, not not Andrew Johnson, not Richard Nixon, no U.S. president has come anywhere close to an attempt to take over the government, to an attempt to destroy the centuries-long American experience and supplant it with a dictatorship. No one else has come anywhere close to doing that. It is the marvel and the mystery of my life that Donald Trump is still a free man. There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever as to what he did. He did it on camera in front of the whole world. The whole world watched. And yet he is still a free man. In fact, he's the odds-on favorite to get the Republican nomination for the next presidency, for the next presidential candidacy, the next presidential election. When he doesn't believe in the election, he doesn't believe in the presidency. He wants to destroy the country and install himself as an unelected leader. It is the marvel and the mystery of my life that what he did does not disqualify him from public life. At the very least, it should disqualify him from freedom. It's high treason, the worst treason any individual has ever committed against the United States of America, and done on camera. And yet, we're moving very slow with all due deliberation. It's possible that 10 years from now we may politely ask him to come before our commission and give deposition. And if he says no, well, we'll certainly wring our hands in the courts for 10 years. Well, what's that you say? We don't have 10 years? Oh, what's that you say? There are midterms coming up in 18 months. Oh, what's that you say? After the midterms and after the 2024 election, we're not only going to be out of power, we're going to be ritually executed on the ellipse. Well, we're still going to take our time. These things happen in a certain way. No, James Buchanan is a piker. In fact, something I never in a million years thought I would say. Richard Nixon is also a piker. Richard Nixon was forever and ever, for 40, 50 years, he was my signature of the very worst that a U.S. president could get. I wrote about him. I read about him endlessly. I fumed about him. He has cost me peace of mind. And the one thing that I have to say that I'm forced by the 21st century to say about Richard Nixon is that at least he was a patriotic American. I can't believe that circumstances would ever get to the point where I would be doing that, but nevertheless, no. My answer to the question is no, and I short answer. W is a couple of these prompts are designed to get my goat. The next one's the same way. W is for Warhol, Andy Warhol. Shave him bald. I'm at this event in New York, but is Andy here? I don't even see him. oh, you've brought over this figure who's shaved bald. Okay, and you say this is Andy Warhol. I guess I can kind of make that out from the cut of the mouth and the chin. It looks like his mouth is moving. It looks like he's talking, but I literally can't even hear him without his hair. So I didn't see him until you pointed him out to me. But even with you pointing him out to me, I mean, does he come with subtitles? I can't even hear him without his hair. Warhol said, art is whatever you can get away with. Would you consider Away from the Flock by Damien Hirst and My Bed by Tracey Emin to be art? The only way that you would consider either of those pieces to be art is if you heard Andy Warhol's comment and believed it. In this case, as in all cases, Warhol was wrong. Art is not whatever you can get away with. What an absurd thing to say. It's just completely absurd. And the two pieces of art that Jim has chosen here, I will go to my grave believing he chose them specifically to get my goat. The two pieces of art here are not art. They are objects presented in a certain way. The artist didn't make them what they are, and the presentations are extremely simple. One is just an animal in a glass. The other is an unmade bed. They are art being what you can get away with. They're complete frauds. And yet, there's not enough money in your entire family tree to buy either one of them, even if they ever went on for sale. Only the richest institutions in the art world could afford to buy one of these things. Complete frauds. Because I could do it. You could do it. I bet your bed is unmade right now. Anyway. No, they aren't art. They're garbage. And also, Warhol was wrong. Let's see. W is for wood. We go back to Jim's log cabin. He often sequesters us to a log cabin so we can make some bookish choices. You are in a log cabin with no internet and no Kindle, and there are 6 books in the cabin. The books are all W related. There's Meridian by Alice Walker, Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, Maisie Dobbs by Jacqueline Winspear, The Chrysalids by John Wyndham, and Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. Which of these books would you read first, and which would you leave to last? And you may rank them if you so wish. And I would have to rank them because I'm not going to fall for the bait of the question asking whether or not I've read them all. I've got too upset about this tag as it is. I have read all of these books, and I don't know that I could split hairs enough to rank them right down the line, but I know what the best of these books is. And it's a little controversial, especially considering not only the openly racist and bigoted age in which we live, but also because of my well-known stance with Dude Bro Lit. And the best of the books on this list is The Bonfire of the Vanities. By a pretty wide margin, I would say. We'll see if time vindicates me on that. We'll see if it does. But if I were trapped in this cabin with no internet, first of all, I might reconsider whether or not life was worth going on without the internet. I mean, what would I do without talking to my imaginary booktube friends for 2 hours every day? But if I were, I would probably reread Bonfire of the Vanities. I'm kind of chuffed. Is that the word that the UK people use? I'm kind of annoyed. I'm vexed. I'm bemused that I don't have a copy of Bonfire of the Vanities. I know what I want. I want the ordinary, you'll know, a lot of you will remember the mass market paperback of Bonfire of the Vanities that had that weird kind of stylized Art Deco art going down one side of the front cover. I want the hardcover of that from whenever Bonfire of the Vanities came out, 30 years ago now. It'll show up. The Brattle will provide, but it bothers me a little that I don't have Tom Wolfe's big, ambitious novels. I believe they're better than most critics said. I believe they're better than most readers estimate. I believe they deserve to stand for a while, and I don't have any of them. And Bonfire of the Vanities, of course, was the first one. So anyway, let's move on here. Then stuck in the middle of this thing is who do I tag? But I tag you all, especially if your middle name is Wenceless. W is for Wales. Have you ever been to Wales? I have been to Wales, yes, many, many times. I've tracked the wilds of Wales with a crowd of beagles at my shins. I've met many, many locals, been to many, many tiny little tucked away Brigadoon-style Welsh towns, and loved it. Most of the time that I spent in Wales, as is true with many, many temperate countries, most of the time that I spent tramping out of doors with my boys. And many, many times we came across other babies, other babies whose instinct, whose training had been to sound off savagely, viciously, territorially if a human, let alone a human in a crowd of dogs, comes anywhere near your patch of ground. So I had to de-wire that tendency quite a few times, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And Wales is also a very rare example where I brought back a souvenir. That almost never happened, but I have a little Welsh red dragon. uh, W is for Wuhan. Have you ever read a book about a pandemic, real or fictitious? Of course, I have read books about pandemics many, many times, many fiction and nonfiction books. But when it comes to the plague that came out of Wuhan, I have a rather odd distinction, a thing that I don't know an example of anywhere else, and that is the writer Lawrence Wright, who a lot of you will know for The Looming Tower, a very good book about the lead up to 9/11. Uh, Lawrence Wright wrote a novel called The End of October, and he wrote it. We've seen examples on this channel of people claiming that their book was written before the COVID-19 pandemic, when obviously it was not. But Lawrence Wright wrote his book before he knew anything about what was happening in Wuhan or would happen in Wuhan. It's a novel. The End of October is a novel about a novel coronavirus breaking loose on the world. What would happen? How would countries respond? What would determine whether or not the response was good or bad? How badly would it get everybody off on the wrong foot? An eerie thing, because thanks to publishing schedules, it came out just as the COVID-19 pandemic was taking off. It looked like, at first glance, if you hadn't known just how long it takes to write a book, you would think this is the crassest opportunism in the world from a world-famous author, but it wasn't. Instead, it was one of the eeriest feats of accidental timing that I've ever seen in publishing history. There's an example with the Titanic that is just about as eerie. I don't know of anything else that comes close. And then after that, Lawrence Wright got to work right away on a nonfiction work called The Plague Year, about the first year of COVID-19. And it's a slim work. It's a lot less satisfying than his novel, which is not often that you'll hear me say that, but it is the same author tackling the same subject from two different sides. And I read those. I've read lots and lots of other things too, but I've read those, and that combination is fascinating. Let's see here. Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Are there any books or writers which intimidate you? No. No, there aren't. If I'm doing my job right, I intimidate them. No, there are no books that intimidate me. Why would they? Then W is for We the Drowned. This is an offhand reference. Jim doesn't even mention the author's name, but it's a novel, and it's a heck of a good novel. We the Drowned ought to be on your list. Give it a try. Try the first 100 pages. This is a big atmospheric novel, very, very wide, broad timescale about seafaring life and the pitiless nature of life at the shore, a life gleaned from the sea. And the odd narrative voice is only one of the odd things about this book. If you find a copy of We the Drowned that's affordable on Book Depository or whatever, I say give it a try. But we talk a lot on this little corner booktube about the pros and cons of bailing, and I love those conversations. But with this one, I would strongly urge you, read past your first instincts to bail. Give it 100 pages instead of... I have many, many issues with the whole idea of bailing, but I worship Sean the Book Maniac, our Empress of Bailings, just as much as anybody else does. And I perfectly agree with the basis of bailing, which says you shouldn't be forcing yourself to read a book you don't like. But with We the Drowned, I would give it a little more time than your first instinct at bailing. Wait till the second instinct at bailing. It would be my only suggestion. But what is the prompt? Have you read any books using the first-person plural, or as for much of the narration, which is very, very tricky? You've got to have a convenient and believable way to have someone saying, we were there, we thought this. That can be very, very tricky. I have read some things like that. I think it works much, much better in the short term than the long term. Short stories that do first-person plural are much more convincing than long works. And I've not only read works like that, I also in 2021 wrote a short story that is told, coincidentally enough, Jim doesn't know this, but that is told from the first-person plural. Will you be able to read that story? Well, yes, you will. Will you be able to pay to read that story? Yes, you will. Details to follow. Let's see here. W is for word games. Do you have any favorite word game? No. Games for children. I've got reading to do. W is for writing. Have you written any books? I have. I've written a whole shelf of books that hardly anybody has seen. There are quite a few books on that shelf that no one has read. I love the act of writing, even fiction. In fact, especially fiction. Crafting a gigantic, multifaceted novel, and then the novelists out there will know what I'm talking about. The act of warping all of those plot lines to make a 4-point landing at the end, as typing the end. There is no feeling like that in human existence. It has to be felt, to be experienced, to be believed, and it is incredible. It's habit forming, which is why I never miss NaNoWriMo. I make sure I try to have a fiction project going at all times, or relatively most of the time, because I love it so much. And I am raring to go for NaNoWriMo. And then there are bonus prompts. W is for Wa. Do you prefer Evelyn or Auburn Wa? The author of Brideshead Revisited has my foremost loyalty in this family. Freakishly talented family. W is for Wikipedia. Do you use this as your principal source of reference? No. If my reference is important, then I double check it all over the place and don't use. I put all sorts of octopoidal weight on many sources, but I always start at Wikipedia, and I would argue so do you. I would argue everybody does. And the only reason that I want to stress that is because I'd be willing to bet that 99% of you, although you use, especially you writer types, you use Wikipedia all the time, every day. But I'm willing to bet that when that screen pops up saying, please don't scroll away, we're having a fundraising drive, we're trying to keep advertising off the site, we're independently financed, we need your help, I'd be willing to bet that when you see that, you don't pledge anything. And next time you see that, you should change that. Very much so. You are getting a lot from Wikipedia. And right now you're not giving anything back, except traffic, which Wikipedia doesn't care about. Ethics, just simple ethics say that the next time that box pops up, you pick the highest number to give them. Just go and get your credit card and pick the highest amount that you can give them. Not the lowest, not $1. Pick $100 and give it to them. Then wait a couple more cycles and then do it again. You should pay for Wikipedia, is what I'm saying, because it's incredible. I could do a whole video just on the marvel that is Wikipedia in human history. There's never been anything like it in human history, and it's free. And because it's part of the scenery on the internet, we tend to take it for granted, and we shouldn't. We absolutely shouldn't. Virtually no other part of the internet has stayed the way Wikipedia has stayed. And Wikipedia has done that solely through principles, solely through an ethical decision that ought to be rewarded. Anyway, but I do love Wikipedia. I love the fact that it has grown, that its model, its organization principle, means that it gets more reliable with time. Everyone is allowed to correct it. Everyone is allowed to correct the corrections. And every single tiny specialist suddenly, therefore, has a dog in the race of whether or not a Wikipedia entry is correct. There are 4. In the English-speaking world, there are 4 Sherwood Anderson scholars. Not people who love Sherwood Anderson, but people who've seen the archives, who've read the unpublished works, who know everything there is to know about Sherwood Anderson, a minor American author. There are probably 4 specialists like that. They absolutely have a vested interest to make sure the Sherwood Anderson page on Wikipedia and all the related pages are correct. I love that. Absolutely love it. It latches on to inborn human characteristics as a feature of keeping itself self-correcting. So pay them, is what I'm saying. Next time you get a chance, pay them. You don't need to wait for that drive either. If you fish around on Wikipedia, you can find the button that says donate. Anyway, here endeth the sermon. W is for World Wide Web. Do you have a favorite website? Well, it's YouTube, of course. Where else do I get to talk to all of my imaginary booktube friends? I do have an Instagram, and I post pictures of Frida, my little dog, on Instagram. She's not on her pillow because she's crammed next to me, sound asleep, curled up tight next to me. And I have Twitter, where I talk about books and then also politics. But it's mainly YouTube. Let's see here. W is for Weir. Have you read The Martian or Hail Mary by Andy Weir? Do you like it or them? like nor the have you read part and say, yeah, I've read all of Andy Weir's books. I like them just fine. Uh, they're incredibly lazy. They're incredibly supermarket checkout lane, and falsely so. Well, that's the only reason that I sound ambivalent about that. I don't have any problem with the supermarket checkout lane, but Andy Weir is clearly writing down to what he thinks is that audience. It's not him. The artificiality of it is obvious on every page, I think, and that I was sorry to see that that got worse with Project Hail Mary instead of better. I was kind of hoping that I am still hoping. This is a very smart, very talented author. I'm hoping that he just discards that as a writing habit because it bothers me. Any kind of condescension bothers me, and that in one of the most popular novelists out there, I think you would have to work really hard. You'd have to travel a long way to find a movie more condescending than the movie adaptation of The Martian. I just anyway. The final prompt you'll be glad to hear is W is for world. Do you have a favorite book about the circumnavigation of the world? And I do. I've read a few, and I've liked a lot of them, but there's only one. It's just like I mentioned a million years ago with Seven Pillars of Wisdom. There's only one. Sir Francis Chichester wrote Gypsy Moth Circles the World a long time ago about his own voyage around the world, and there's no competition. It's by far the best book on circumnavigating the world. So I'm going to go with that. I am, much like with a few other books on this list, I am mortified when I was making out my answers here. I was mortified to realize that I don't have a copy of Gypsy Moth Circles the World. The Brattle will provide. I'm sure that it will turn up, but I don't have one now. It's amazing to me, you know. I look at this book collection. I see tons and tons and tons of books that I kind of sort of like, that I kind of sort of find interesting, that I kind of sort of want to be here. Look at the shelf. Let's find an example. Okay, Haynes' book, The Age of Reagan. Big fat thing about the rise of Ronald Reagan and Ronald Reagan-style Republican politics. A good, companionable book. I kind of sort of like it. I have a copy of that on my shelf, but I don't have a copy of Gypsy Moth Circles the World. And what was the other one? A couple of those big werewolf compendiums. I don't have those on the shelf. But wasn't there another one? Oh yes, Bonfire of the Vanities. I don't have a copy of that. Don't have a copy of Man in Full. These things, the books. In other words, the thing that keeps my book collection as a steady, ongoing, living thing is exactly that imbalance. I have plenty of books that I wouldn't shed much of a tear about losing, and I have plenty of books that I really want that I don't have. So this book collection has not yet reached perfection. It will. It's the omega molecule. It will reach perfection. I will stabilize it just to glimpse perfection. And then we'll jettison out the hold. In the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. That was the W tag. All well and good, very nice and friendly, but let's see how the next three tags go, shall we? I can't wait.